Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this virtual symposium to launch the NIH Common Fund's new program, Harnessing Data Science for Health Discovery and Innovation in Africa, or DSI Africa. I'm Joshua Gordon, the director of the National Institute of Mental Health, one of the 4 institutes at the U.S. National Institutes of Health leading this new program. The NIMH is the lead U.S. agency supporting mental health research and the largest funder of such research worldwide. I'm pleased to be here to introduce this session on the ethical, legal, and social implications of data science research, to discuss these crucial aspects of data science and its responsible, thoughtful, and inclusive application to biomedical research. As the director of the NIMH, I've seen firsthand the enormous potential that we have when we use the power of big data approaches to improve the lives of our patients. Combining many different types of data into a cohesive whole has a profound impact on our ability to better understand diseases, to develop novel treatments, and to tailor these treatments to individual patients' needs. We are seeing scientists analyze complex data sets, including social media, to assess suicide risk, or using artificial intelligence approaches and novel algorithms to screen for severe mental health disorders. There are also ongoing studies evaluating the use of mobile phone sensors and mining patterns of natural language processing to probe for early signals of behavioral health issues. In addition to supporting this kind of research and more in the United States, the NIMH has been building its global mental health research portfolio, born of a commitment to address the rising global burden of mental illness. We support numerous projects around the world, and especially in Africa. Last year, I was fortunate to visit some of our research sites in Kenya, where I witnessed firsthand how NIMH-supported scientists are having a meaningful impact on mental health locally, with lessons that learned are relevant globally. I'm incredibly excited, proud, and hopeful to launch this additional effort focused on data science, aimed at helping develop the infrastructure to do such work in Africa and supporting the many outstanding African scientists conducting data science research of relevance to human health. So, why is it important to consider the ethical, legal, and social implications of these approaches? I won't answer this for you directly, as I know that following me, you'll hear from experts with real-world experience in this area. What I will say is that it is critical we consider these implications of data science early in the development of research ideas, rather than waiting until problems arise, to ensure that these approaches are developed and implemented in a responsible, thoughtful, and inclusive manner. I believe that we don't know yet the extent of what we can learn from harnessing a data science approach, but I am convinced that we genuinely have the potential to make a real difference for literally millions and millions of people across the globe. That's why I'm very excited to be part of this initiative and look forward to seeing what comes out of it in the years to come. Thank you for being part of this effort and for coming today and for keeping ELSI considerations at the forefront of your research.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Pamela Andanda, a professor of law at the University of the Witwatersrand, Johannesburg, where I focus on data protection, intellectual property rights, and governance of research from ethical, legal, and public policy perspectives. We'd like to welcome you to this panel, where our main focus is how we can integrate ethical, legal, and social issues into data science research. And we are going to do this by focusing on 2 main things. The first thing that we want to do is to highlight the specific issues within the ELSI framework. And then we'll each give a presentation, at least highlighting some of the critical issues that we need to consider. I will start by providing the broad context, focusing specifically on strategies that we can use for ensuring that we integrate ELSI framework throughout the research project. And my colleagues, Rosemary, Josephine, and Clement, will follow after that, to dive deep into the specific issues that I'm going to address and highlight. So a very warm welcome. In this presentation, I'm going to take you through some of the strategies that I've thought of, which can help us to integrate ethical, legal and social issues framework into data science research. And I just want to start by pointing out that this is a topic that I have been reflecting on over a number of years by virtue of being involved as a member of a number of data and by specimen governance committees on the African continent. And more broadly, during the ongoing pandemic, I was privileged to collaborate with the Research Data Alliance, which was looking at data sharing within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we did come up with some of the recommendations, which I will point out as I go through the presentation. Apart from that, I currently chair the Advisory Committee on Ethics in our university, and that has given me a chance to consider some of the issues which I'm going to share with you. Here is the overview of what I'll talk about. First, I'm going to point out the main attributes of the evolving landscape of the digital technology and some of the issues that we need to address in data science. After that, I look at the challenges, because we have to appreciate that this evolving context can challenge the way we apply the well-established ethical principles. The principles stay the same, but the application can be a bit challenging, and that's what we need to reflect on. I'll finish off by at least pointing out some of the strategies that can help us in this integration process. Now, if we look at the extent to which the landscape is evolving, I like using the word fuzzy contours of the evolving landscape. And first of all, we look at the social framing of data sharing. The social framing changes in the sense that we are used to dealing with people face to face in the context of health. But where technology comes in, this can cause a little bit of disruption. Where we are dealing with gadgets, we're dealing with landscapes that are unfamiliar to us in our daily lives. And therefore, this is quite different in our experience. Apart from that, the difference between what is in the public space and private space can get blurred, and that raises its own issues. And we also need to consider the socio-technological context, which is very important in the sense that when you are conducting health research, you want to include the social and economic and other contexts that accompany that particular data source that you're dealing with. And therefore, the emerging issues that I would like to point out in this regard are, for instance, equitable partnerships. We all operate in different contexts, different spaces, and there can be inequitable access to resources. That can cause some divide. And that calls for clear consideration of our collaborators, making sure that we're equal partners in the course of research. That, for instance, can help us to avoid many issues in the course of research. Now, going back to the varying policies and guidelines, it's important to underscore the fact that we can have a situation where people practice what I like calling ethics dumping. And ethics dumping takes place when a researcher decides to move their research to a destination or space that's not properly governed, or where the application of the guidelines and policies are not as stringent, and therefore they dump what would not be approved in their own context in a different, under-regulated or under-governed space. So that is something that we need to consider as an issue in integrating ELSI framework. If we go back to the socio-technological context, this urges us to ensure that there's responsible and open sharing, while at the same time maintaining public trust. Public trust is extremely important, and I'm going to explain further how we can ensure that that public trust is gained, specifically making sure that we respect data subjects, making sure that, in fact, the equal partnerships that I'm talking about here should also extend to participants and data subjects. Among the researchers, we try to foster that equity, but also when we relate to participants or data subjects, at least they're human. Data is always related to some human person. It's not just detached from them. Now, when we look at ways of integrating the ELSI framework, there are challenges. And here I just intend to mention the challenges because my colleagues, Rosemary, Josephine, and Clement, will go through this in detail. And the first challenge simply calls our attention to the fact that we need to consider the role of ethics in ensuring that individuals are respected, we get their consent, but consent is not a once-off encounter. It's an ongoing process. And that's why it's the whole ethics framework and also the individual researchers' reflection on how they deal with data subjects. And Rosemary is going to address that, the role of ethicists, when it comes to supporting and also enabling researchers to conduct research in an ethical way that respects data subjects. She's also going to consider literacy in Africa, particularly in view of the digital divide and the different resource contexts. The second point relates to big data. Big data has got many benefits. It has improved efficiency, but the barrier remains how we can foster sharing of data among researchers. And therefore, Josephine will tackle that. She's going to deal with big data and some of the ELSI issues that emerge from there in order to enable us deal with them appropriately to get rid of any barriers to research collaboration. The third challenge that we can think of, I've already given you the context that we're in different stages of development, and resource allocation is not always equitable across the globe and also on the continent. The different institutions that maybe are privileged and others are not. And therefore it's important that we ensure equitable partnerships among the collaborating research institutions and researchers as well. In this slide, I just want to share with you some of the ongoing work in the African Academy of Sciences Data and by Specimen Governance Committee, which was established in 2019. I'm privileged to serve on that committee and also to chair it. The policy paper, which we have finalized, will be published in the course of this month. And therefore, I urge you to look out for the alert and the policy brief that will bring this to our attention. But just to highlight 2 points, 2 challenges that this policy paper speaks to. The first one is informed consent. And when we look at informed consent, at least we have paragraph 2.1 of the policy document that reminds us that we need to understand and appreciate the local values of the research that we're doing and the context that we are looking at. And that must guide us in coming up with the informed consent process. The African Academy of Sciences Committee has also developed a framework for equitable partnerships. And I think it's very helpful to note that there's a lot of leeway. So institutions and researchers are free to ensure that the institutional policies and values are made explicit. A lot of times it's lack of communication that can lead to misunderstanding. So when these policies and values are made explicit in collaboration, then it's much easier to engage in equitable partnerships, also appreciating each other's context. And of course, the committee also appreciates the fact that we need to embrace modern technology in ensuring data provenance in terms of exchange, being able to follow up and track on possible agreements for data reuse and also secondary uses when data is shared. So it's a very open system promoting open access and open sharing of data. On the issue of big data, I've reflected on this matter and mostly from a legal perspective. So I have a paper in the International Review of Intellectual Property and Competition Law, which tries to highlight how we can overcome some of the barriers to using big data in health-related research. My perspective is purely legal and a bit of ethical, but there are also social implications that I address. And it's simply advocating that we try to incorporate the custodial responsibilities framework. If we embrace custodial responsibilities by emphasizing that I'm not just an owner of data. In fact, the issue of ownership creates a lot of obstacles. So I should view myself as being the custodian of the data, and therefore I facilitate sharing, I facilitate respect so that other people can share it. So you can find that in that article. I want to wrap up by moving into the strategies that we can use. And the strategy essentially entails reintroducing the researcher as the focus of responsibility. So researchers have got an important role to play in ethical decision making based on 4 values of fairness, respect, care, and honesty. And here I have the 4 value framework, which tries to introduce the individual. The individual is not just the researcher. Any stakeholder can exercise this individual agency responsibly by using that as an ethical strategy to ensure that these 4 values, which we consider to be universal, everybody identifies with these 4 values. They're intercultural, they're global in scope, and at least they're non-technical, they're easy to understand. Anybody can understand these values in any space that they walk into. And this 4 value framework was developed in a coordination action project called the Trust Project, which I was involved in. And it's contained in a tool known as the Global Code of Conduct. Here is the website where you can find the Global Code of Conduct. It's globalcodeofconduct.org. And you can have access to the full code, which can help you. It's a tool which you can use to emphasize and put this strategy into practice. And so the strategy is embedded in this code of conduct, which ensures compliance with ethical standards, irrespective of where and what kind of research one is doing. And since we've started by saying that the landscape is evolving, in an evolving space, you need hands-on tools that can help you. And this is one such tool which can help you. It has been adopted by many funders and many institutions, including my own institution and the University of Cape Town, the 2 universities that take pride on this continent for being research intensive. Of course, there are many others, but these are the 2 universities on the continent that have adopted this code. And so the 4 values that you can see on this slide, honesty, care, respect, and fairness, essentially help individuals to access what I describe as individual moral reflexivity. At every stage of your research, you step a few steps back and ask yourself, am I being honest? Am I caring for people that are behind the data that I'm handling? Am I respectful? Am I fair in my dealings with other stakeholders? And that kind of reflection is what I'm calling an ethical strategy for integrating ELSI framework into data science. If you want to understand and read more about this strategy, I have a paper that was published last month. It focuses on ethical and legal governance of health-related research that use digital data from user-generated online health content. And it essentially tries to encourage us to embrace those 4 values as researchers that deal with data in a way that respects individuals. So what is my take-home message in this strategy? The take-home message that I can leave you with is that you need to embrace voluntary self-appraisal during the lifespan of a research project. That is really key to integrating ELSI framework in conducting data science research. So the 4 values that I've mentioned, plus this attitude of voluntary self-appraisal is really key. Ethics principles are there to guide us. Ethics advisors and committees are there to support us. At the end of the day, it's individuals and institutions that will be at the forefront of integrating ELSI framework in data science research. With that, I really thank you for your attention, and I hope that this strategy will help all of us to embrace open science, open research, open and responsible sharing. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rosemary Musesengwa. I am a Zimbabwean. I work at the University of Oxford. I am a senior researcher in mental health ethics, and I am currently looking at developing an ethics framework for digital innovation in mental health for young people in Africa. I'm going to talk to you about integrating ELSI into data science research and the role of the ethicist and why it is important to have an ethicist that conduct ELSI research during data science research. So the question that people ask is, why do we need to embed or include ELSI in data science projects? From the literature and from what we are seeing currently is that data science is fast changing the way we conduct global health research. And consequently, it has also sparked a lot of debate regarding the principles, morals, the values that underpin its development and application, specifically so in low and middle income countries. And also, on the other hand, we also see that there has been a proliferation of ethical and legal guidance that attempts to address and regulate data science in general, and subsequently the research that comes with it. Research has also gone to show also that in our research teams, in a lot of these data science projects, there is not an explicit process for ethical analysis or reflection or assessment. And most issues are identified in a kind of ad hoc manner, and there is no critical and consistent ethical analysis going on. Hence, you will find that there is this push to embed and integrate critical ethical assessment in data science projects that will allow the production of socially acceptable, politically and legally feasible data science research. So what are some of the mechanisms and what can an ethicist do when they are involved in a data science project? The question is how do I become part of a data science project, and where do I fit in this whole puzzle? This list is not exhaustive, but these are the sort of the most common and what I've looked at in literature and seen what people are currently doing. And you'll find that there are sort of three approaches that I have looked at. So there are projects that have ethicists who are taking an advisory approach, which is an approach from the outside, looking into the data science project. Some have got standing committees or teams that are there to continuously advise at various steps of the project. Some have got ad hoc committees that deal with issues as they come up. And then also some have got independent ethicists that work within the project, but sort of taking an outside looking in kind of role, and are not engaged in the day-to-day processes of the data science project, but are there to provide some ethical reflection when and as required. Another approach that I've seen also in some of the data science research projects is what they're calling parallel ethics, where ethicists, they have a parallel project that is looking at some of the issues that are coming out of a data science project. They sort of work together. There is some cooperation between the data science technocrats and the ethicists, but these run as parallel and separate projects. It works, and we see a lot of reflection on ethical issues coming out of data science projects. And what the NI is advocating for is really an embedded approach, which is the ELSI approach, which is looking at co-designing research, looking at the research agenda, coming up with teams that are transdisciplinary, bridging the boundaries between researchers and researched communities. And in this embedded approach, you look at a project and the ethicist sits within the research team. They are part and parcel of the research team, and they come up with the research agenda together, and they co-design things together. And as they carry on their processes in the data science project, the ethicist is also looking at their objectives and going on with their ELSI research as it comes up, and as the data science project develops as well. It is also, a little bit linked to the parallel ethics, but the more embedded approach is that they are not separate projects, but it is one project, and they develop the ideas and they develop the ethics, the legal and the science issues together with the research team, which is, in my opinion, I think one of the most robust ways of doing things. and embedding yourself in a data science project. The other question is, at what stage exactly can I do this embeddedness or parallel process or advisory process? And an adaptation from Rea's paper et al. In 2018, I've provided the references at the end, you shall see them, is engaging in ELSI research at the conceptualization stage, where they call ex ante, where you are anticipating things that are going to come up because of the project that people are working on. So evaluating ELSI at the early stage of the research process, its conceptualization stage and protocol writing stages. Another approach is also those who have done the interim methods. So this is where there's an active process of picking up of ELSI as the project progresses and continually questioning the morality and decision-making processes during the project, taking the researchers, the data science researchers, through a process of ethical reflection as they continue to deal with their project. And then also, as we are currently seeing, and as we know, societal standards and moral and legal standards, they tend to shift and move over time, and also development keeps moving at an alarming pace. So there are also ELSI projects that are dealing with, ex post, after the results are out, the applications are out there from the data science project, but there needs to be some continual reflection of their effects on how we live and how we conduct our business in society. And that's another way that you could be involved in a particular stage for ELSI research. And I'm going to also want to focus on what are the other important roles that the ethicist plays in a data science project. Definitely from history, we see that a lot of ethicists, when they try to be involved in data science projects, there's always this adversarial kind of relationship. And what we're looking at, I think, going forward is for us to have a more supportive role and collaborative role for ethicists in data science projects. One of the other roles we've just talked about is how you can conduct your research on ELSI issues. Another role is to interpret guidance and laws for practical use. A lot of our guidance documents and a lot of our laws, they are written in a particular manner that maybe ethicists or lawyers, people in the legal field can understand, but not necessarily a researcher. A lot of researchers don't have that skill to interpret laws. And we end up with checklists of things rather than people understanding the need and what is required of them. So the role of the ethicist is to interpret available guidance and laws for the practical use of a data science project. And also where it is needed is to set up robust ethics advisory systems for a particular project, for example, an ethics advisory board, to help identify and facilitate mapping of critical ELSI issues that come up in data science projects. That is the role of an ethicist. To be advisory. Most data science, like I just explained, and data scientists are not trained in ethics or ethical reflection. And I think I highlighted the educative role more because we are talking about the DSI Africa project, which is going into Africa, a space where issues of there's very little digital, there's very low digital literacy, and there is a need for the ethicists to talk about and explain to researchers, to communities about digital rights, digital literacy, what is data governance, what is data ownership, what happens to my data when I punch it into a health application, what is going on, what is data science, and intellectual property issues and legal issues that go on in data science projects. So I think the role of the ethicist there is to be an educator and facilitate people to understand some of these things that are coming up and help in capacity building. The list is really endless. You could think of more roles that an ethicist can play in a data science project. So I would like to end with a quote from a paper by Saltz in 2019. So they interviewed data scientists, and they wanted them to explain to them what they understood about ethics and legal and social issues and how their work affects the day-to-day processes. And one of the data scientists said, there is no preset formula for applying ethical consideration that works in all cases. This means that you cannot just study a list of rules, but instead must constantly be evaluating a number of different ethical issues, bias, data integrity, use of the results, to make sure that you covering all that apply in each given situation. So this kind of codes, gives us a burden as ethicists to say in data science projects, we have a role to play to teach people, to facilitate dialogue, for people to be able to do ethical reflection of their work as they take on their projects. I thank you. And I've listed the references there. Floridi et al. In 2016, What is Data Ethics? That is an important reference. The Global Landscape of AI Ethics Guidelines, Ethics in Data Science Projects, Parallel, Embedded, or Just Part of the Team Ethicists Cooperating with the EU Security Project, and the RARES paper I referred to, Methods of Practicing Ethics in Research and Innovation. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Josephine Agyeman-Duah. I'm a doctoral researcher at the University of Oxford, and my background is in international health with experience in maternal and child health, health system strengthening, and have experience working in developing country settings and recently in Europe. So in this presentation, I would like to stimulate some thinking around big data, ethics, legal and social implications of data science research, and also pinpoint some of the challenges, opportunities, and how we can leverage on these opportunities to improve health indicators for us in Africa. So it's going to be kind of a discussion, kind of a thinking process for you to think and reflect on your work as a data scientist, as a researcher, and how we can all contribute to improve data science research in Africa. So my discussion, I've put it in 4 big blocks, looking at big data in relation to in public health. I've put it in 4 main areas. The first one is informed consent. What is informed consent? The second block I'll be talking about is on infrastructure for big data, some of the challenges and opportunities for us to consider. And also we'll look at capacity building. What are the considerations for capacity building that we have to think about when we look at big data, the opportunities for us in Africa and how we can leverage on that. And the last one will be on regulation. How do we regulate the use of big data, the use of data, informed consent, make sure that people consent to the information they're giving to us, and we also protect their privacy. So my discussion will be in these 4 big blocks. So let's go back to informed consent. What is informed consent? It basically means that before you do any research, you have to explain to your potential participants what the research is about, implications on the person's health or whatever you're researching about. Are there risks? Are there some privileges or benefits from the research? The person has to understand what he or she is going in for. And you have to give in time for the person to really reflect to see whether they want to participate in your research or not. And they also have the right to withdraw from their research at any point in time without giving any explanation why they have withdrawn. And withdrawing from a research should not affect the rights that they have to medical care that they receive. So talking about informed consent, how do we ensure that we play it fair? We have to empower the individual, the community. I think it should take an approach of co-production where, as a researcher, you define your question based on considerations, also considering the relevance of it for the community or the individual. Do they understand the research you are entering into? will it be of benefit to them? So we are looking at ethical, legal, and social implications of research. You may have gone through the ethics, you've checked every box, you may have complied with the legal side of it, but what about the social implications on the individual or the community? These are some relevant considerations that we have to make as data science researchers in Africa. So I think the first one will be for us to empower the community, empower people to understand the research, what we're trying to do, how it will be of benefit to them, and the implications, and also sensitize them so that they know when to voice out when people breach these their rights. And we have to also assure them of data privacy. Now, big data, when somebody gives the consent for the data to be taken, with big data, normally people argue that, well, it's anonymized data, so you might not necessarily need ethics because we cannot identify the person. But yes, you can manipulate data, string some things together, have strings and identify an individual. So it's important that we protect the individual from where we have the primary data collection and even secondary data use, where we have big data is very important. Now, the second block I'd like to talk about is on the infrastructure. Are we ready in Africa to go big data, use big data? Of course, there's a huge opportunity for us to use big data to improve on our health indicators, like with HIV, understanding the gene variants and sequencing. We can capitalize on, let's say, traffic, people, movement, big data on people's movement to understand the variants in the HIV virus, for example, and that can help us in the fight against HIV. And there's huge opportunity for us, but the question is, what infrastructure? Because big data, we have to look at how the data is stored, how it's generated, how it's processed. Do we have the internet capacity to transmit data, share data? So let's look at the infrastructure. Who is going to pay for it? You know, normally when you don't have the ability or the financial power to pay and someone is sponsoring you, you don't always have a voice. So I think as Africans, we have to also consider the sustainability of big data for us, the infrastructure. How are we setting it up? Do we have the capacity? Have we built enough capacity for people to mine the data? So we understand the language, so we don't it doesn't seem like we have resources and we're exporting the resources like the data out for people, interpret it for us to use. So infrastructure is very important. Sustainability of big data infrastructure is very important for us to consider. So these are some considerations I would like to stimulate in your minds for you to think about as a data scientist. And the third point is capacity building, also related to that. So capacity building in the form of talking about even reframing the research question. We have a lot of challenges in Africa. Considering health, I'm more health biased because that's my background. So what are the big questions for us? What are the urgent or the pressing questions that we have to answer? And how can we capitalize on big data to answer these questions? Can we formulate our research questions? Do we have the human resource? As data science, do we have enough data scientists with the requisite knowledge, understand the statistical analysis to formulate the question? So capacity building is very important. And we cannot take out the subject of collaboration. I think collaboration is very important. So not whether it's West, South, or whichever collaboration is very important, but you cannot sit around the table when you don't understand the language of each other. So I think it's important that as Africans, we position ourselves very well so that when we sit around the table with collaborators, we speak in fair language. So there's opportunity for collaborators to learn from us, and we also learn from them. We cannot take the subject of collaboration out of data science research from us, especially if we're going big data. We need a collaboration, but we have to be able to negotiate fairly at the table. The last point I would like to consider is regulation. And I would like to also cite the example of the GDPR, which is widely used in Europe, so people understand the common language. In Africa, every country has some kind of regulation to guide data privacy, data sharing, but we don't have a common language. So I have to understand what happens in Ghana. When I go to Togo, I have to understand what happens there. But what about if we had a common language regulation such that where it doesn't matter which border I step across, I we speak a common language, so I know how data is supposed to be shared and how data, I have to protect the privacy of the individual. So I think we have to consider, people may argue that maybe it's not the way for us to go. Yes, all I'm saying is that let's contextualize the issue of regulating a common language. So we have a common law that cuts across in Africa that enforces researchers, scientists to ensure that they protect the privacy of their participants in research. And also importantly, let's have a visible commission that will reinforce the implementation of these regulations that we have. Because if people breach the rules and they go scot-free, or it's not visible, we don't see it out there that somebody's cracking the whip, then people will have their way. So I think it's important we have an open commission. Again, if it's common, like we have the AU, we have to have something like that in data science, I believe. So let's have a common commission that looks at the implementation of the regulations that we have in place. And I'll always go back to the individual. Beyond informed consent, let's empower them. As I said earlier, let's empower the community individuals to understand that, okay, we have a common law that protects us when we give out our data. It's good we give out the data because then scientists can learn from patterns and help us to improve on our health indicators. So if the individual, the community, they understand what their data is going to be used for, they understand the rules and regulations, they can also support governments to ensure that researchers, scientists are complying with the regulations in place. And just to summarize it, I would say that, so the 4 blocks I want us to consider when we thinking of big data and public health, how we can leverage on the opportunity of using big data to improve our indicators in Africa. Let's consider 1, informed consent, protecting the privacy of individuals, respecting the rights they give to us to have access to their data, beyond even the primary data collection when it comes to secondary data, transmission of data sharing, even to third parties. Secondly, let's look at infrastructure of big data. Are we ready yet in Africa? What do we need? Let's consider that. Thirdly, let's look at the capacity building so that we can contextualize big data use in our context to solve local problems that pertain to us as Africans. And my final point is on regulation. Let's have a common language that cuts across borders. Let's have an enforcement agency that will make sure that we comply with privacy issues. And lastly, let's empower the individual, the community, so they can stand up for their rights when their rights are breached. Thank you very much.
Good day. My name is Clement Adebamo, and I'm honored to be a member of this panel. Today, I will be speaking on the issues of data justice and data science research in Africa. So the objective of my presentation today is to address the ethical, legal, and social implications of data science research, what it is, what it isn't, why you should care, and the importance of integrating an ELSI framework into data science research in Africa. This is part of the Harnessing Data Science for Health Discovery and Innovation in Africa project, which is why we're all here today. I'm a professor of epidemiology and public health and member of several institutes and centers at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. I'm also a research scientist at the Institute of Human Virology in Nigeria and the Center for Bioethics and Research in Nigeria. I'm addressing this topic from the perspective of the conversations that I've heard with bioethicists and research ethicists working in Nigeria who have sought to engage with this process. And one of the questions that often comes up in those conversations is what precisely we mean by data science, and how is it, if indeed it is, systematically different from other sciences, and whether these differences matter in any significant or substantial manner from other sciences and in ways that require a different type of ELSI engagement. So data science is relatively new discipline. depending on how you visualize it. And it's a discipline that's, I think the consensus now is it's a branch of statistics that has 5 stages. Data scientists engage in data capture, in maintenance of data through warehousing, cleansing, staging, processing, and generating data architecture. They also process data, data mining, clustering methods, classification, modeling, and summarization. They analyze data to generate exploratory or confirmatory results. They conduct predictive analysis using regression and other models. They mine data regardless of the form. And they also engage in qualitative analysis. And lastly, they communicate the output of their data work. So that gives us a perspective of all the various ways in which data science can interface with ELSI. Now, what about ELSI? Well, research ethics is old in one sense, but also a relatively new field in another sense. In fact, ELSI as an integrated program within specific research endeavor can be said to have emerged essentially about 1990 as part of the Human Genome Project. The mission of that ELSI program was to identify and address issues raised in genomic research and how these issues affect individuals, families, and society. We can modify the mission statement of that ELSI program and apply it to the ELSI of data science research today. We can create the following domains for ELSI research in data science. One domain will focus on data science research, where projects investigate and address the ELSI issues that arise with the design and conduct of data science research. We can also consider data science in healthcare, and this will be projects that investigate and address ELSI issues that arise in connection with data science research into medical and healthcare issues in a variety of settings and populations. Then we have the broader legal, policy, and social issues that interface with data science research, whether they're conducted in the clinical or non-clinical settings. So in this way, we can appreciate how an ELSI researcher may design, conduct research on the ethical aspects of data science. As an example, I would like to focus on one of the major moral philosophical foundations of research ethics, which is justice. If we take the definition of justice from the distributive justice perspective and define it as the political, economic, and social frameworks that each society has, its laws, its institutions, guidelines, and policies that result in different distributions of benefits and risks across society, we can visualize how this justice, in the sense of distributive justice, interacts with data science, given that data science, by nature and definition, is really population level science at a very high data level. So whereas in most research projects, we are concerned about individual level interaction and data, data science often engages with big data, huge amounts of structured and non-structured data that may have been captured with the active or non-active participation of the human subject. So members of human societies, we know, vary significantly from each other and vary even within each individual over time. And these variations have implications for the types of data that they generate and the uses that we may make of those data and their attitudes towards our use of those data. The risks, benefits, and burdens of the generation of the data and its use may therefore be distributed differently in ways that have individual and population level implications. So discussions about the structure of the economic, political, and social frameworks within which data science is conducted and how the benefits of such research, the benefits and the risks of such research are distributed are appropriate ELSI of data science research topics. Which moral frameworks and moral principles are preferable and why, and how these principles should be weighted or prioritized when they conflict. Are there new research frameworks, new research ethics frameworks needed? Or do we need to engage in additional moral philosophical principles, new legal frameworks and guidelines beyond the classical and current tools that are used in research ethics? How do we engage with the secular trends in population attributes and attitudes to data science? What about intergenerational research ethical issues that may interface with data science research? All of these questions require philosophical, legal, and empirical studies. The FOA for the DSI project, the DSI Africa project, includes a list of some of the questions that may be asked when we're thinking about ELSI of data science research. And I will encourage that we review these questions. They're not exhaustive, but they certainly will guide us in our thoughts. I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I will acknowledge my funding and declare that I have no conflicts. Thank you very much.